Welcome back to a new episode of Marvel Man 901. In this episode I'm going to talk about the Evolutionary War from 1988, which pretty much follows the annuals from that same year. Before you check this out, make sure to see the previous episode where I go through the origins of the High Evolutionary and why he started to do this. Now, before I go into the story in itself, I'm going to explain the three factors that the High Evolutionary uses. He used the gatherers, who pretty much gather specimens, to experiment on them and find out more about the species. We also see the purifiers, who pretty much purify species, who are subpar. And the eliminators, who pretty much kill crazies and drug lords, as to say. And basically anything that could harm humanity overall. Make sure to listen through to the end of this, as the ending is very cataclysmic and pretty brilliant. So I'm going to start off with X Factor Annual 3, where the purifiers were attempting to purify some subterraneans. This includes lava men, tyrannoids, and moloids. However, one of the subterraneans turned out to be a mutant, a powerful telepath, who sent out a psychic cry, which could be heard by anyone who is basically psychic sensitive in New York. Among them, of course, being Jean Grey of X Factor. At this period, the X Factor was actually the original X-Men. Beast, Cyclops, Jean Grey, otherwise known as Marvel Girl, Iceman, and Angel. Caliban, who was also the Horseman of Apocalypse, heard the cry as well and told Apocalypse about all of it, really. Meanwhile, X Factor found the subterraneans and the telepath. However, the telepath sent the other subterraneans to fight them, believing them to be enemies. Apocalypse went to the High Evolutionary, tried to talk some sense into him, but they ended up fighting. Meanwhile, Jean ended the fight with the subterraneans and befriended the telepath, pretty much showing him that they were all friendly. However, the purifiers showed up, and naturally this time X Factor were facing the purifiers alongside the subterraneans. Apocalypse continued to fight the High Evolutionary, but this time in space. However, when the fight didn't really move forward, Apocalypse teleported both of them to the subterraneans and watched the fighting. Apocalypse was also trying to convince the High Evolutionary that mutants weren't actually weak, as they have very different views of the whole situation. Eventually though, the subterraneans and X Factor wins the fight, and the purifiers had to leave. Continuing with Punisher Annual 1. The Punisher went off to kill El Kaiman, who was a big drug lord, but he was attacked by Eliminators. Here it is revealed that the Eliminators wanted to kill crazies and drug lords. So Punisher and Kaiman worked together to fight the Eliminators, and after Punisher defeated the Eliminators, he killed Kaiman. Moving on to Silver Surfer Annual 1. Where the High Evolutionary contacted the Eternals, who were of course also highly evolved, mainly due to the Celestials. He explained that he wanted to evolve mankind into the best they could be, really, but he needed some help. He asked them to look into the Silver Surfer's DNA so they could use that information. Meanwhile, the Silver Surfer met the super-skrull, and naturally being enemies and all, they started to fight. Eternals showed up to stop the fight and capture both aliens and took them to Olympia, which is their home. Here, Super-Skrull actually learns that the Skrulls no longer were able to alter their shape, and this pretty much crushed him. Silver Surfer and Super-Skrull teamed up to escape their captives, and the Eternals were convinced to let both aliens go. Silver Surfer also let the Super-Skrull go in order for him to help his own people. So I'm going to move on to New Mutants Annual 4, where Bulk and Glowworm were captured by the Gatherers, who were pretty much experimenting on them to alter their abilities. Later on, the Gatherers captured Magma, on again, off again, member of New Mutants. Empath happened to be there as well, but he couldn't really do anything to help. Now, the New Mutants weren't off to visit Magma, but as she was captured, they went to the Eliminators instead. So they helped Magma escape, but Mirage, or Daniel Moonstar, she was pretty much tossed into one of the machines and was altered. Before she could create images out of people's fears, but now she actually created real things. The New Mutants escaped while the Hellfire Club showed up, which of course is Emma Frost, Sebastian Shaw, Tessa, and the current principal of Expansion, Magneto. In Fantastic Four Annual 21, the Inhuman royal family wanted Crystal to return to Quicksilver. Quicksilver, who was her husband and the father of her child, but previously been fairly insane. Apparently he was better now. Meanwhile, the High Evolutionary talked to Uatu, the Watcher, about the whole situation, but they couldn't really come to any consensus. So, the High Evolutionary sent the Purifiers to attack the Inhumans in Attilan, which was on the moon. Quicksilver helped and led the Inhumans, and the Fantastic Four also showed up as well. After the fight, after they defeated the Purifiers, Black Bolt showed Crystal just how much he needed her there, and it was actually kind of moving to see. Moving on to Amazing Spider-Man Annual 22, which introduces Speedball. Spider-Man was framed for murder. Meanwhile, Kingpin was on high alert about the Eliminators killing drug dealers. Spider-Man and Daredevil meanwhile teamed up in order to clear Spider-Man's name, and Speedball pretty much bounced around some muggers who were later on killed by Eliminators. Meanwhile, Kingpin interrogates some Eliminators, finding out a lot more about the truth. Daredevil and Spider-Man actually get some of this information from Kingpin. They go to the Eliminators' headquarters and try to stop this dangerous machinery which is pretty much in the works there. Meanwhile, Speedball outside stopped the dangerous machinery just in time before it actually was activated. Moving on to X-Men Annual 12, where Storm impulsively leaves for the Savage Land. X-Men naturally follows through Gateway, who could create gateways. In the Savage Land, High Evolutionary wanted to bring Growth back to the Savage Land, but he was attacked by Terminus. So the X-Men after they had arrived, and both the X-Men and High Evolutionary tried to figure out what was going on with Terminus. Havoc was sent to the High Evolutionary headquarters, where he basically tried to get a handle on this character. We can see Saladin as well as pretty much the assistant of High Evolutionary, which is very interesting considering the fact that she is otherwise pretty much an evil queen of Savage Land. Meanwhile, the other X-Men actually found this kind of force field in the middle of nowhere, which actually led to the other Savage Landers, the native Savage Landers. However, when Terminus attacks, the X-Men and the Savage Landers fight, and it is actually revealed that Garrock was inside the Terminus all along, and he had no memory of how he got there. The High Evolutionary used Garrock to heal the Savage Land, making him become one with the land. Now, in Web of Spider-Man Annual 4, the Eliminators entered the Everglades, pretty much to use the Nexus of Realities. This, of course, caused a great imbalance with Man-Thing, who was the protector of the Nexus. Meanwhile, Kingpin called the Slug, who was pretty much the Kingpin of Florida, pretty much warning him about the Eliminators and what was going on in New York. Meanwhile, introducing Poison, a very strange character indeed, who attacked the Eliminators who were looking for her, and she and Spider-Man on their separate paths pretty much followed the Eliminators into the Everglades where they fought them. Man-Thing was pretty much reassembled again and helped in the fighting as well, and they managed to defeat the Eliminators. So in West Coast Avengers Annual 3, the High Evolutionary wanted Vibranium from Wakanda, so he sent some gatherers there, but Black Bolt and the Wakandans defeated them. Before this happened, Bill Foster, otherwise known as Giant Man, had been undercover and pretty much working on his own serum in the High Evolutionary headquarters. He pretty much placed a message inside one of the gatherers' suits. Black Panther found this message and went off to the West Coast Avengers, told them all about this, and then they came back to Wakanda when they were attacked by censors. Meanwhile, in Savage Land, Kaiser and Shana met Moon Knight, Mockingbird, and Tigra, the three Avengers that later on went to the High Evolutionary headquarters to talk to the High Evolutionary, who captured the three Avengers. However, the three Avengers managed to escape. Bill Foster fought, realizing that he needs to do something. Mockingbird fought the High Evolutionary, and then Bill Foster used his new and improved serum. He had stopped using it before because it caused him great harm. But now he actually managed to have improved upon it and became Giant Man once again. So he fought the High Evolutionary as well, and apparently it was a bit of a shock as the High Evolutionary escaped. Going on now to Spectacular Spider-Man Annual 8, where gatherers hunted, Gwen Stacy. Now, this is not real Gwen Stacy, she is in fact dead still, but Spider-Man realizes that he needs to find out who she actually is, because she can't be the woman he loved previously. Meanwhile, the High Evolutionary observed the young gods, believing that they could very well help him in his mission. Meanwhile, Spider-Man had to help this special Gwen, as she was then hunted by the gatherers. Spider-Man managed to hitch a ride with one of them, who kidnapped her into the High Evolutionary headquarters. Naturally, the fighting continued there, and then the young gods actually showed up to fight as well. Now, this Gwen was saved, but the High Evolutionary actually explained that that this Gwen wasn't in fact Gwen Stacy, but she was a completely different person whom Miles Warren, otherwise known as the Jackal, had changed, had altered into this Gwen Stacy. As you might know about Miles Warren, he was actually very much in love with Gwen Stacy and, well, he did some very strange things. The High Evolutionary changed her back to how she had previously been before Warren. In the last issue we see Avengers Annual 17, where the previously believed to be deceased Jocasta sent a message to the Avengers, who Captain America, otherwise just known as the Captain at this time, which is why he looks like US agent by the way. He got this message and got help from some other Avengers, Beast, Hulk, Hercules, Falcon, and actually Yellow Jacket, otherwise known as Rita Dimara. She was previously a villain who had actually been there to hurt Hercules very badly, but she had second thoughts. They went off and naturally managed to save Jocasta. They also had to go and help to stop fighting between Atlantis and Deviants, as the High Evolutionary pretty much caused them to fight as he wanted to sterilize them. The Avengers naturally managed to convince the Atlanteans and the Deviants to stop fighting about everything really that was going on, and then they got help from these two species to attack the battle sub base of High Evolutionary. They learn of the evolutionary bomb inside the volcano, the bomb which will, when detonated, evolve all around it. So naturally it's a huge fight. The Avengers against the High Evolutionary and his men, and Newman as well. The Captain figured that if he could evolve someone, if he could evolve a god already, or pretty much a god, they could pretty much even out the odds, as the High Evolutionary was extremely powerful. So they did, and Hercules was actually evolved into a very powerful being. So this fight between these two are just titanic. It's brilliant. And however, as Hercules is actually evolved further and further, the more he fights, he becomes overpowered, and so does actually the High Evolutionary. Both of them are discorporated and pretty much become mist. However, they will later on come back again, but that is a tale for another day. The Avengers managed to actually stop the bomb. I hope you have enjoyed all this. Make sure to subscribe and share. You can also check out Spotify, where I will pretty much post this as well, and other stuff as well. If you want to learn more about the High Evolutionary, check out its origins in my previous episode. Otherwise, thank you all for listening, and I hope you have enjoyed.